I'm Margaret, 32 female. I live in a small, quiet apartment filled with more books than furniture, and I work as an archivist for the city's historical society. It's a peaceful life, one I've carefully built for myself, far from the constant noise and judgment of my family. For years, I believed that keeping a polite distance was the key to survival. But I was about to learn that sometimes, the only way to deal with people who consistently underestimate you is to give them exactly what they think you deserve, with a price tag they never saw coming. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The phone call from my sister, Olivia, came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a rare enough event to be startling. Usually, our communication was limited to a group family chat where my contributions were often ignored, or a generic, happy birthday text once a year. I was in the middle of cataloging a collection of turn-of-the-century photographs, the scent of old paper and preservation chemicals filling my small office. My world was one of quiet details and forgotten histories, a stark contrast to Olivia's, which was a curated feed of brunch spots, designer handbags, and sponsored wellness retreats. "Maggie, darling?" Her voice chirped, a little too loud, a little too bright. I winced, holding the phone away from my ear. "You'll never guess what. I was just talking to Mom and Leo, and we were saying it's been ages since we did something special for you." I paused, a fragile glass plate negative in my gloved hand. A special something for me? This was new territory. My family's definition of special was usually reserved for Olivia's latest social media milestone, Leo's commission bonuses, or my mother Eleanor's theatrical fundraising galas. I was the reliable, boring wallpaper in the background of their vibrant, chaotic lives. "Oh," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I've learned over the years that showing too much emotion, whether excitement or skepticism, was like handing them ammunition. "Yes, you got that promotion a few months ago, right? Head archivist?" She said the title like it was a quaint, dusty relic she just discovered. "We never properly celebrated you. It's just dreadful of us. So we've booked a table for Friday night at Aria, the new place downtown. It's supposed to be impossible to get into, but you know Leo, he has his connections." Aria, I'd seen articles about it. It was the kind of restaurant where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery bill, a place of minimalist decor and maximalist pricing. It was entirely their scene, not mine. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Maybe, just maybe, they were trying. People could change, couldn't they? Hope, I've found, is a stubborn weed. "Wow, Olivia, that's really thoughtful," I managed to say, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Of course, sweetie, we're family. We have to celebrate each other's successes, big or small." The condescending pat on the head was audible even through the phone. "So, Friday at 8. Dress nicely, okay? It's a very chic place." The implication was clear. Don't show up in your usual librarian cardigans and sensible shoes. I sighed internally. "I'll be there," I promised. The rest of the week was a low hum of anxiety. I told myself it was a genuine gesture. My promotion, while not flashy, was a significant achievement in my field. I was now in charge of preserving the city's entire documented history. It was important work, meaningful work, even if it didn't come with a commission or a sponsorship deal. Perhaps they had finally realized that. I even bought a new dress, a simple but elegant dark blue silk that felt both comfortable and appropriate. It was an investment, but I reasoned that if this dinner was a turning point, a step towards a better relationship with my family, it would be worth it. My father, David, called me the day before the dinner. He was the quiet dissenter in our family, a retired history teacher who understood my passion for the past. "Are you sure about this, Maggie?" he asked, his voice gentle. "You know how they can be." "I know, Dad," but Olivia sounded so sincere. Maybe they're finally seeing me as more than just their weird little sister. He sighed. It was a sound I knew well, the sound of a man who had chosen peace over confrontation for 40 years. "All right, Well, have a good time, and know that I'm proud of you no matter what. His words were a small comfort, a little life raft in the turbulent sea of my family's dynamics. On Friday, as I got ready, I felt a flicker of genuine excitement. I imagined us sitting around the table, laughing. I imagined them asking me about my work with real interest, listening to me talk about the fascinating things I discovered in the archives. I pictured a world where my brother didn't just see me as a convenient source for a loan he'd never repay, and my sister didn't see me as a social dead end. The fantasy was so pleasant, so warm, that I almost convinced myself it could be real. I took a rideshare to the restaurant to avoid the hassle of downtown parking. Aria was exactly as I'd pictured, a monument to expensive taste. A towering glass facade, an interior of dark wood and brushed gold, and a hushed atmosphere where the clinking of cutlery sounded like wind chimes. The hostess at the front desk was impossibly tall and wore an all-black ensemble that probably cost more than my rent. "Good evening," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Name for the reservation." "I'm meeting my family," I said. "The reservation should be under Olivia, Leo, or Aliner." She tapped on her tablet, her long, manicured finger gliding across the screen. "Ah, yes, they've already been seated. But first," she reached under the counter and pulled out a small, unassuming object. It was a paper wristband, the kind you get at a festival or a cheap concert. It was a garish, neon green color that clashed horribly with the restaurant's sophisticated decor. Printed on it in bold, black letters were two words: limited guest. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. A wristband? Here, it made no sense. "I'm sorry, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The hostess's professional veneer didn't crack, but I saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. "The host of your party requested that we give this to you upon arrival. If you'll just hold out your wrist." My blood ran cold. The warmth of my earlier fantasy evaporated, replaced by an icy, familiar dread. This wasn't a celebration. It was a setup, a performance, and I had just been handed my costume. The beautiful dress I wore suddenly felt like a joke. The hope I had so foolishly nurtured shriveled and died. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this night was not about celebrating me. It was about reminding me of my place. My hand trembled slightly as I held out my wrist, allowing the hostess to fasten the cheap paper band around it. It felt like a shackle. The weight of it was immense, not because of what it was, but because of what it so clearly represented: humiliation. Walking into the main dining room of Aria with a neon green paper wristband cutting into my skin was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Every head didn't turn, the music didn't stop, but in my mind, a spotlight was trained directly on me, illuminating the garish strip of paper for all to see. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. My family was seated at a prime table in the center of the room, a large, circular booth upholstered in plush velvet. They were laughing, holding up champagne flutes, the picture of celebratory bliss. They hadn't even noticed my arrival. Olivia, in a glittering cocktail dress, was telling an animated story, her hands gesturing wildly. Leo, looking smug in a designer suit that was a size too tight, was leaning back, swirling his champagne and surveying the room as if he owned it. My mother, Aliner, was beaming, her eyes flitting around to see who was watching them, soaking in the reflected glory of the expensive surroundings. My father was the only one who seemed out of place. He sat quietly, nursing a glass of water, a strained expression on his face. He saw me first. His eyes widened slightly, and his smile faltered as he caught sight of the wristband. He looked down at his lap, a silent admission of his inability to intervene. As I approached the table, a waiter intercepted me. He was a young man with a kind, tired face. He glanced at my wrist, and his expression tightened with a professional, practiced neutrality. It was clear he'd been briefed. "Good evening, miss," he said, his voice low. "Welcome to Aria. I just need to quickly go over our limited guest policy with you." He said it as if it were a standard restaurant procedure, as if dozens of patrons every night were branded with these humiliating paper bracelets. The term echoed in my head. Limited guest. It was so perfectly, cruelly them. It wasn't enough to exclude me. They had to give my exclusion a formal, corporate-sounding name to make it seem legitimate. Your party has arranged a special package for the evening, the waiter continued, avoiding my eyes and focusing on a point just over my shoulder. This wristband indicates that your beverage selections are included in their tab. You're welcome to order any non-alcoholic drinks, house wine, or domestic beer from the bar. He paused, taking a breath before delivering the final blow. However, the package does not extend to any food items, including appetizers or entrees. There it was, the punchline to a joke I hadn't known I was a part of. I was invited to a dinner to celebrate my promotie. And I wasn't allowed to eat. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it almost made me laugh. It was a perfectly crafted insult, designed not just to wound but to incapacitate. They had brought me to a temple of fine dining and instructed me to fast. They wanted me to sit there, watching them feast, a smiling, silent testament to their generosity and my own unworthiness. My family had finally noticed me standing there. Olivia's smile widened. "Maggie, there you are, we were getting worried." She beckoned me over, completely ignoring the waiter and the neon band on my wrist. It was part of the act. They would all pretend it wasn't there, making me the crazy one if I dared to mention it. I gave the waiter a small, tight nod. "Thank you for the information," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I refused to let it shake. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I had spent a lifetime learning to absorb their casual cruelties, building up a tolerance and emotional callus. But this was different. This wasn't casual. This was premeditated. As I slid into the booth next to my father, my mother leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet. She placed a hand on my arm, her rings cold against my skin. "It's just a formality, dear," she whispered, her voice laced with false sympathy. "It's how these big-ticket reservations work sometimes. They have to control the costs. You understand?" She patted my hand. "That means no entree, just drinks, but you can have as many of those as you like." Her words were meant to soften the blow, to frame it as a practical matter rather than a personal slight. But the whisper was the most damning part. It was an admission of guilt, a confirmation that she knew exactly how cruel this was and was actively participating in the charade. "That means no entree, just drinks." The phrase would be seared into my memory. I looked across the table at Olivia and Leo. They were watching me, their eyes gleaming with a kind of predatory curiosity. They were waiting for the tears, the outburst, the quiet, wounded retreat. They wanted a show. They wanted me to play the part of the grateful, poor relation, happy to be allowed even in the vicinity of their glamorous lives. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent break, but a quiet, decisive click. It was the sound of a lock disengaging, a door swinging open. For my entire life, I had played their game by their rules. I had been quiet, agreeable, and accommodating. I had swallowed my pride so many times I had forgotten what it tasted like. I had accepted their narrative of me, the boring, bookish, unsuccessful daughter who should be thankful for any crumbs of attention they tossed her way. Tonight, they had overplayed their hand. They had pushed too far. In their arrogance, they had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just a quiet archivist. I was a person who spent her days sifting through details, finding patterns, and understanding systems. My job was to see the full picture, to understand the story that wasn't being told, and I understood this story perfectly. They thought they had trapped me. They thought they were in control. But in that moment, looking at their smug, expectant faces, I realized they had just made a critical mistake. They had handed me the rules of their new game, and they had no idea I was about to play it better than they ever could. I looked at my mother, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite hide the smugness in her eyes, and I did something they didn't expect. I smiled. It wasn't a pained, forced smile, but a bright, genuine one that seemed to take them all by surprise. Leo's smirk wavered, and Olivia's perfectly arched eyebrows drew together in a flicker of confusion. "Of course, Mom, I completely understand," I said, my voice light and airy. "This is such a generous gesture. I wouldn't want you to break the bank on my account. Just being here with all of you is what matters. My compliance was so absolute, so cheerful, that it threw them off balance. They had prepared for a drama queen, not a gracious guest. My father looked at me, a question in his eyes, but I gave him a small, reassuring nod. He slumped back into his seat, a silent spectator once more. "Well, good," Elinor said, patting my arm again before withdrawing her hand. "I knew you'd be sensible about it." "Absolutely," I said, turning my smile to Olivia. "Thank you again for organizing this, Liv. It's a beautiful restaurant. I feel so honored." Olivia, regaining her composure, preened. "Well, you deserve it, Maggie. We really are so proud of your little promotion." The waiter returned to the table. "Can I get anyone started with a drink order while you look over the menu?" "Champagne for the table?" Leo boomed, flagging the waiter down as if he were hailing a taxi. "The best you have. We're celebrating my sister." He gestured vaguely in my direction, though his eyes were already scanning the room for any one important who might have overheard him. He wasn't celebrating me, he was performing the role of a magnanimous brother. The waiter, a different one this time, the sommelier, by the looks of his formal attire and the silver taste fin hanging from a chain around his neck, approached. "An excellent choice, sir. We have a wonderful vintage brut that I can highly recommend." "As long as it's expensive," Leo said with a wink. My family laughed. It was their favorite inside joke, the idea that price equaled quality, that the more something cost, the more it validated their own worth. They began chattering excitedly, debating what they would order. Oysters, foie gras, lobster thermidor. They spoke the language of indulgence fluently. I picked up the heavy, leather-bound menu and opened it, pretending to read. The descriptions were poetic, the prices astronomical. A single appetizer cost more than the dress I'd so carefully chosen for this sham celebration. I sat there for a few minutes, listening to their conversation, a silent observer behind a pleasant mask. They talked about Leo's latest car sale, a convertible that cost more than my condo. They discussed Olivia's upcoming trip to Bali, which was, of course, a business expense for her brand. My mother chimed in with gossip about the other high society volunteers she worked with. They were a closed loop, a self-sustaining ecosystem of ego and materialism. My promotion, the supposed reason for this gathering, was never mentioned again. I was an accessory, a prop brought in to make their celebration of themselves seem less narcissistic. After about 10 minutes of this, I placed my menu down on the table. "You know what?" I said, catching a brief lull in the conversation. "I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all this excitement. I think I'll just pop over to the bar to get my drink. The waiter mentioned it was okay." I gestured to my wristband. "Give you all some time to decide on your food without me holding you up." Elinor beamed. "What a considerate idea, dear." She was relieved. My presence at the table while they ordered food would have been an awkward reminder of the little cruelty they had orchestrated. Me removing myself from the equation was the perfect solution for them. "Don't take too long, Maggie," Olivia said, already deeply engrossed in the wine list. "The champagne will be here soon, and we need to toast to you." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "I'll be right back," I promised. As I stood up and walked away from the table, I could feel their eyes on my back. They thought I was retreating, going to a quiet corner to lick my wounds in private. They thought I was going to stand at the bar and meekly order a club soda, fulfilling my designated role as the humble, limited guest. Their theory of me was so complete, so ingrained, that they couldn't imagine any other possibility. They saw me as predictable, passive, and most importantly, powerless. But as I walked across the plush carpet toward the long, gleaming mahogany bar, I wasn't feeling wounded. I wasn't feeling powerless. I was feeling a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The humiliation they had intended for me had backfired. It hadn't broken me, it had liberated me. By so explicitly defining the terms of my exclusion, they had given me a strange kind of freedom. I was no longer bound by the unspoken rules of family obligation. I didn't have to pretend, I didn't have to be polite, I didn't have to absorb their toxicity with a patient smile. They had handed me a paper wristband and told me my place, and I had decided in that moment to take them at their word. I was a guest. I was limited. But the limits, I was beginning to realize, were not nearly as restrictive as they thought. The smile on my face was no longer just a mask. It was the prelude to a performance they would never forget. The bar was an oasis of calm compared to the dining room. It was dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background. The bartender was a professional, an older man with a crisp white shirt and a no-nonsense demeanor. He was polishing a glass, his movements efficient and practiced. He looked up as I approached, his eyes flicking for a brief, almost imperceptible moment to the green band on my wrist. He knew the deal. "Good evening," he said, his tone perfectly neutral. "Good evening," I replied, sliding onto a bar stool. "Quite a system you have here." I held up my wrist. He gave a slight, non-committal shrug. "We accommodate our patrons' requests." "I'm sure you do," I said, my smile unwavering. "Well, my patrons have requested that I enjoy some drinks on their tab, and I am a very, very grateful guest." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "And I have a small request of my own." The bartender listened, his expression unreadable as I laid out my idea. I spoke in a low, calm voice, making sure no one else could overhear. I didn't know if he would agree. It was an unusual request, one that certainly bent the rules of standard restaurant service. He could have shut me down, told me it was impossible, or even reported me to the manager. My entire plan hinged on this one person's willingness to either be a little mischievous or simply not care enough to stop me. "My family is celebrating at that large booth in the center," I began, gesturing with my head. "This wristband," I held it up again, "ties my drinks to their bill. The waiter explained the rules to me: non-alcoholic beverages, house wine, or domestic beer. Very clear." He nodded, still polishing the same glass. "That is the arrangement." "Here's the thing," I continued, leaning in a little closer. "I don't want to keep bothering the waiters by ordering from the table, and I don't want to keep running back and forth from the bar all night. It's disruptive to their dinner." I framed it as a matter of politeness and consideration, an appeal to his sense of professional efficiency. "I was hoping you and I could streamline the process. My family is known for its generosity. They want me to have a good time." They insisted. I could see a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He'd seen families like mine before. He knew the dynamics without me having to spell them out. "So, what I'd like to do," I said, getting to the point, "is start a tab here with you. But instead of putting it on my card, you just link it directly to their table number. Table 12, I believe. That way I can order whatever I want from you throughout the evening, and it all goes onto one consolidated bill. It's simpler for everyone. I don't have to worry about what's house and what's not, and you can just charge their account accordingly. It's all coming from the same place, after all." I held my breath. It was a simple, logical-sounding request, but its implications were huge. The limited guest restriction was verbal, a rule conveyed by the waiter. It wasn't programmed into the point-of-sale system. The system only knew one thing: drinks for the person with the green wristband go on table 12's bill. I was gambling that the restaurant's digital infrastructure was not as nuanced as my family's cruelty. The bartender stopped polishing the glass. He set it down carefully on the counter. He looked at me, then over at my family, who were now laughing uproariously as the sommelier poured their expensive champagne. He saw Leo's flashy watch and Olivia's designer dress. Then his eyes returned to me, to my simple silk dress and the ugly paper bracelet. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "That makes perfect sense," he said, his voice flat, betraying no emotion. "Much more efficient." He turned to his computer terminal, typed for a few moments, and then swiped a blank card to open a new tab. "All right, miss. The tab is open and linked to table 12. What can I get for you to start?" A wave of triumphant relief washed over me. It was working. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You have no idea how much I appreciate this." He just gave me a curt nod. "So, to start." I looked up at the rows of bottles behind him, a library of liquid possibilities. The house wine I was permitted suddenly seemed very, very unappealing. I think," I said slowly, savoring the moment, I'll start with a glass of the Chateau d'Yquem. The bartender's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, his professional composure was broken by a flash of genuine surprise. The Chateau d'Yquem wasn't just a fine wine, it was one of the most legendary and expensive dessert wines in the world. A single glass was a three-figure expense. An excellent choice, he said, recovering quickly. There was a newfound respect in his eyes. He clearly understood that this was no longer about getting a free drink. This was a statement. And please, I added, could you have it sent over to our table? I should probably go back and join them for their toast. Of course, miss. I slid off the bar stool, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I walked back to the table, my posture straight, my head held high. I felt like a spy returning from a successful mission behind enemy lines. I arrived just as the sommelier was finishing his pours. My family was so engrossed in their champagne that they didn't even notice the different, golden-hued wine being placed in front of me by a different server. There you are, Olivia trilled, raising her glass. Perfect timing, everyone a toast. She stood up a little unsteadily. To my dear sister, Margaret, we are also so proud of you and your career. May you continue to find happiness in the little things. Cheers. Cheers, they all echoed, clinking their glasses together. Leo slugged his champagne back like it was a shot of cheap liquor. I raised my own glass, the crystal heavy and cool in my hand. The wine inside it was the color of liquid sunlight. Thank you all so much, I said, my voice dripping with sincerity. To family. I looked each of them in the eye, for always giving me exactly what I deserve. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was extraordinary. It was a complex explosion of flavor, apricot, honey, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. It tasted like victory. The best part was they were all so wrapped up in themselves, so convinced of their own cleverness that they didn't even notice what I was drinking. They saw me with a glass in my hand, playing my part, and their assumptions filled in the rest. To them, it was just a glass of cheap house white. They had no idea they had just bought me one of the most expensive drinks in the city. And the night, I thought to myself as I took another sip, was still young. The first hour of the dinner was a masterclass in my family's particular brand of oblivious self-absorption. With the initial toast to me out of the way, they considered their familial duty done. The conversation immediately veered back to their favorite topic, themselves. I sat back, taking small, appreciative sips of my celestial wine, and simply listened. It was like watching a nature documentary about a species I was related to but could no longer truly understand. Leo launched into a long, rambling story about a client who had tried to haggle over the price of a sports car. I mean, can you believe the nerve? He scoffed, gesturing with a breadstick he'd slathered in butter. If you have to ask the price of a V12 engine, you can't afford it. It's that simple. Some people just don't understand class. He took a large bite of the breadstick, chewing with his mouth open. Here was my brother, a man who still occasionally called our father for help with his rent, lecturing a table on the nature of class. Olivia, not to be outdone, began talking about her brand's new authenticity campaign. It's all about being real, you know, she said, while simultaneously taking a dozen selfies, angling her phone to find the most flattering light. People are tired of curated perfection. They want to see the struggle, the journey. She paused to edit one of the photos, applying a filter that smoothed her skin into an uncanny, poreless sheen. My followers really connect with my vulnerability. My mother, Eleanor, was in her element, name-dropping every person she'd seen at the restaurant. Oh, look, there's Judge Abernathy, she'd whisper loudly. And isn't that the woman who owns the boutique on Main Street? Her daughter had the most dreadful wedding, you know. She was the social commentator of their little universe, keeping score in a game only she seemed to be playing. My father, as usual, remained mostly silent, nodding along, his expression growing more tired as the evening wore on. He ate his appetizer with a quiet, methodical precision, his focus entirely on his plate. Meanwhile, I was playing a game of my own. Every 20 minutes or so, I would excuse myself from the table. My, this wine is going right through me, I'd say with a light laugh, or, I just need to stretch my legs for a moment. Each time, I would take a leisurely stroll back to the bar. My bartender, whose name I learned was Arthur, would see me coming and have a new suggestion ready. We developed a silent rapport. He understood the assignment perfectly. "The sommelier just opened a bottle of Screaming Eagle Cabernet," he murmured on my second trip. "The party at table 7 only wanted one glass each." This was one of California's most famous and expensive cult wines. A bottle could retail for thousands of dollars. "That sounds delightful, Arthur," I said. "Just a small pour. I don't want to be wasteful." He would pour the glass, add it to the ever-growing tab for table 12, and I would wander back, a new and priceless vintage in hand. They never noticed. They were too busy debating whether Leo should trade his luxury SUV for an even more luxurious one. On my third trip to the bar, I decided to be bold. "Arthur," I said, feeling a thrill of pure audacity, "my family is celebrating. It feels wrong that I'm the only one enjoying these lovely vintages. Perhaps we could send a little something to the table." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" "They love champagne," I said, "and my brother believes the more it costs, the better it tastes. I saw you have a bottle of the 2008 Salon Le Mesnil Blanc de Blancs in the cellar display. I think they would adore that." Arthur's eyes widened almost comically. The Salon was a champagne of legendary status. It was a unicorn wine, produced only in the best years, and its price tag reflected that. It was well over $1,000 a bottle. "Are you sure, miss?" he asked, his voice low. "Positive," I said with a serene smile. "My sis. Ter said it was my celebration, and I want to share the joy. Just put it on the tab. And Arthur, when you bring it over, please make sure you announce it properly. Tell them it's a special, complimentary bottle from the management to congratulate the guest of honor on her promotion." His lips curled into a true smile this time. "It would be my pleasure." I returned to my seat. A few minutes later, Arthur approached the table, followed by a busboy carrying a silver ice bucket. In it rested the magnificent bottle of Salon. "Excuse me," Arthur said, his voice calm and authoritative. "A gift from the management. We understand there is a celebration tonight for a promotion. We would like to offer you this bottle of 2008 Salon Le Mesnil with our compliments to help you celebrate." My family stared, momentarily stunned into silence. Then they erupted. "Oh my God," Olivia shrieked, clapping her hands together. "They recognized me from my Instagram." "I told you this place has class," Leo bellowed, slapping the table. "They know who their important customers are." My mother looked as though she might faint from sheer social ecstasy. "Salon," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "Eleanor, you must have told them about my fundraising committee." Arthur uncorked the bottle with a theatrical flourish, the pop echoing slightly in the dining room. He poured a small amount for Leo to taste. Leo, who wouldn't know Salon from sparkling cider, swirled it, sniffed it, and took a sip with a ridiculously serious expression. "Sublime," he pronounced. "Excellent notes of expensive." Arthur poured for everyone, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second as he filled their glasses. He didn't pour any for me, which was part of the genius of it. It made the gift seem even more legitimate. They drank the champagne like it was water, their egos inflated with every bubble. They toasted me again, this time with genuine, if completely misguided, enthusiasm. They were toasting me, the guest of honor, whose celebration had just earned them a free bottle of $1,000 champagne. They had no idea that I was the one who had gifted it to them, using their own money. The taste of oblivion, I thought, must be sweet. They were blissfully unaware that with every sip they took, the bill was climbing to stratospheric heights. They were celebrating their own con, while I was pulling a much bigger one, right under their noses. And the main course hadn't even arrived yet. By the time their main courses arrived, a carnivalesque parade of perfectly seared steaks, delicate towers of seafood, and plates garnished with foam and edible flowers, my family was in high spirits. The $1,000 champagne, combined with the earlier bottle and the various glasses of wine they'd ordered, had lubricated their conversation and inflated their sense of self-importance to comical proportions. They were loud, laughing, and utterly oblivious. I, on the other hand, was a picture of serene moderation. I had nursed another glass of exquisite red wine that Arthur had recommended, a vintage Burgundy that cost more per ounce than silver, but I drank it slowly, making it last. I had to keep my wits about me for the grand finale. I politely declined offers of their food. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly," I'd say with a wave of my hand. "It all looks so rich. I'm perfectly happy just soaking in the atmosphere." My abstinence only seemed to enhance their enjoyment. It was as if my fasting sanctified their feasting. My empty place setting was a testament to their generosity. They had provided this wonderful experience, and my refusal of food was, in their minds, a sign of my simple tastes and humble nature, which only highlighted their own sophistication. The dinner conversation devolved further. Leo began loudly trying to poach a waiter, promising him a better-paying job as his personal driver. Olivia was busy texting, probably captioning a photo of her lobster with something about self-care and living yerbis life. My mother had cornered my father and was lecturing him on his posture. I excused myself one last time and went to the bar. "Arthur," I said quietly, "I think we're approaching the end of the evening. Could you do me one last favor?" "Anything, miss," he said. He was enjoying this as much as I was. "I'd like to order a final round of drinks for the table. 4 glasses of the Louis XIII cognac." Arthur froze. He slowly wiped down a clean section of the bar. Louis XIII wasn't just a drink, it was an event. It was a blend of up to 1,200 different eau de vie from grand champagne vineyards, aged in ancient oak barrels. It was served in a crystal glass and cost several $100s per serving. 4 of them would be a devastating financial blow. "That is a significant digestif," he said, understatement coloring his tone. "They've been so good to me tonight," I said, my voice syrupy sweet. "I feel they deserve a proper nightcap." "Please send it to the table. Same instructions as before, a gift from the management." He just shook his head, a look of grudging admiration on his face. "As you wish." I returned to the table just as they were finishing their meals. As predicted, the arrival of the 4 snifters of legendary cognac sent them into a fresh frenzy of self-congratulation. "This is unbelievable," Leo shouted, his voice slurring slightly. "I'm going to have to leave this place a 5-star review." They sniffed, sipped, and declared the cognac smooth, utterly unaware that they were drinking a liquid more valuable than most of the jewelry they were wearing. They finished their drinks, and the table fell into a comfortable, bloated silence. The performance was over. It was Olivia who finally signaled for the check. "Well," she said with a satisfied sigh, "that was just wonderful. I think our little Maggie is all celebrated out." She gave me a patronizing wink. The waiter, the first young man with the tired eyes, returned with a sleek black leather billfold. He placed it discreetly in the middle of the table. Traditionally, my father would have picked it up, but Leo, puffed up on free champagne and expensive cognac, snatched it first. "I've got this one, Dad," he said magnanimously. "My last commission was a big one." He was planning on paying his share, assuming Olivia and his parents would cover theirs. The total in his mind would be high, but manageable when split. He flipped open the billfold. I watched him, my expression placid. I took a slow sip of water, the ice clinking gently against the glass. It was the only sound for a few seconds. Leo's face went slack. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. He stared at the bill, his eyes blinking rapidly as if trying to clear a typo. He looked at it, then looked up, his gaze darting around the table in confusion. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "There's a mistake." Olivia leaned over, annoyed. "Leo, don't be so dramatic. How bad can it be?" She plucked the bill from his trembling hands. Her reaction was even better. Her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of disbelief, then horror. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish. "No," she finally choked out. "No, no, no." My mother, sensing a true crisis, snatched the bill from Olivia. She didn't even try to hide her reaction. She let out a small, strangled gasp. "David," she hissed, shoving the paper into my father's hands. "Look at this. This is robbery." My father put on his reading glasses. He scanned the long, itemized list. His eyebrows rose higher and higher until they disappeared into his hairline. He said nothing, but his silence was more damning than their hysterics. The chaos finally erupted. "There are drinks on here we never ordered," Olivia cried, her voice rising in panic. "Shade tau ikem, what even is that?" "Screaming Eagle," my mother read, her voice trembling. "It sounds made up." And then Leo's eyes, scanning the bill again, landed on the big one, the centerpiece of my malicious compliance. He pointed a shaking finger at the line item. "Salon Le Mesnil, $1,200, he stammered. He looked up, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning terror. But that was complimentary. The manager sent it over." He looked around wildly, and his eyes finally landed on me. I was just sitting there, watching them, my expression calm. I hadn't said a word. "And who?" my brother screamed, his voice cracking, the sound echoing through the now quieter restaurant, causing several nearby tables to turn and stare. "Who ordered the $1,000 wine?" The question hung in the air, thick with accusation and panic. All eyes at the table, filled with fury and confusion, turned to the only person who hadn't eaten a single bite. They turned to me. I let his scream hang in the air for a long moment, savoring the tableau of their panicked, furious faces. The silence that followed was more damning than the outburst itself. Diners at nearby tables were now openly staring, their own conversations forgotten. The air was thick with my family's raw, unfiltered humiliation. Finally, I placed my water glass down gently on the table, the small click sounding like a gavel in the quiet room. I looked at Leo, then Olivia, then my mother. I met each of their gazes, and for the first time, they weren't looking at me with condescension or pity. They were looking at me with dawning horror, as if seeing me for the first time. "The wine was a gift," I said, my voice calm and even, "from the management, to congratulate me." I paused, letting the words sink in, or so the bartender was instructed to say. The color drained from Olivia's face. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you did this." "I didn't do anything," I replied, maintaining my serene smile. "I simply followed the rules you laid out for me. I was the limited guest. My instructions were that any drinks I ordered were to be put on your tab. I was told to have as many as I liked, so I did." I unfolded my hands on the table, revealing the neon green paper wristband, which I had not removed. "You gave me the key. I just decided to see what doors it would open." Leo was sputtering, his face turning a blotchy red. But the cognac, the fancy wines, that's not house wine." "Isn't it?" I feigned a look of innocent confusion. "I'm not an expert on these things like you are, Leo. I just went to the bar and asked the bartender for his recommendations. He was so helpful. I simply assumed it was all part of the package you so generously arranged." The lie was so blatant, so transparent, yet so utterly unassailable. They couldn't prove a thing. I had acted within the technical boundaries they had set. I had malicious compliance on my side. "You tricked us," my mother accused, her voice shaking with rage. "You sat here and intentionally ran up a bill that you knew we couldn't afford." "Couldn't afford?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's funny. An hour ago, you were all talking about V12 engines, trips to Bali, and how price is no object for people of a certain class. I thought I was doing you a favor, allowing you to demonstrate that class. It was my celebration, after all. I assumed no expense would be spared." My father, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, finally spoke. He looked at the bill, then at my mother. "Olivia and Leo." Then he looked at me, and for the first time all night, I saw something other than weariness in his eyes. It was a flicker of something that looked like respect. "She's right," he said quietly. "We were inhospitable." "Inhospitable?" Eleanor shrieked. "David, the bill is over $5,000. She has deliberately and maliciously ruined us." "No," I said, my voice turning cold. The pleasant facade dropped, and for the first time I let them see the anger I had been suppressing for years. "You did this. You planned an evening specifically to humiliate me. You invited me to a celebration in my honor and told me I wasn't allowed to eat. You put a paper wristband on me like a child at a fair. You did all of that because you believe, deep down, that I am less than you. You think I'm poor, boring, and insignificant. You wanted to remind me of my place." I stood up, pulling my purse onto my shoulder. "Well, you succeeded. You reminded me of my place. It's not here, it's not with you." I reached into my purse and pulled out a $50 bill. I placed it carefully on the table. "This should cover my water and a generous tip for the staff who had to put up with you all evening." I turned to leave. Leo shot up from his seat. "You're not going anywhere. You're going to help us pay for this." I stopped and looked back at him. "No, I'm not. This is your party, your reservation, your bill." I gave him a final, pitying smile. Good luck explaining to the manager why the complimentary drinks weren't actually free. I'm sure a man of your connections will have no trouble sorting it out. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked slowly and deliberately, my head held high. I could hear them start to argue behind me, their voices rising in a cacophony of blame and panic. I didn't look back. As I passed the bar, I caught Arthur's eye. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of solidarity from a fellow service industry professional who had seen it all. I nodded back. When I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. It felt like the first clean breath I had taken in years. I felt no guilt, no remorse. I felt light. I had not just settled a score, I had cauterized a wound. I had ended a lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle abuse in the most spectacular way possible. I never found out exactly how they paid the bill. I imagine it involved a frantic combination of credit cards, a humiliating call to the bank, and possibly pawning Leo's oversized watch. They didn't call me that night. They didn't call me the next day. In fact, weeks went by with complete radio silence. The family group chat, once a relentless stream of their trivial updates, went quiet. My father called me about a month later. His voice was tired. He told me Leo had to sell his car, and Olivia had canceled her Bali trip. My mother wasn't speaking to any of them, or to me. The family unit, already fragile and built on a foundation of ego, had shattered. "I'm not sorry, Dad," I told him, and I meant it. "I know," he said with a sigh. "And I can't say I blame you, Margaret. I stood by and let it happen for too long. We all got what we deserved." He was right. They had wanted to host a dinner I would never forget, and I had made sure it was a bill they would be paying for, in more ways than one, for a very long time to come. My quiet life was quiet once more, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was no longer the silence of loneliness, but the silence of peace, the silence of freedom.